All right, class. Sergio Silva Jr. here, doing week one discussion board. Also doing option one, and I will post my references right on the bottom of the video, of the posted video. But I'm mostly just going to be utilizing our textbook, Assessment and Counseling by Hayes, from 2024. I got my hands on the seventh edition, which I'm excited about. So getting into the five main particular areas of attention that you want to pay mind to when you're deciding assessment, when you're just assessing yourself, what assessment tool to use and why you're doing it. So that's who, what, where, when, and why. So who is, of course, what's the population? Is this in individual therapy? Is this for a group? Are you in clinical practice? Are you in trying to get research done at a large scale, at a small scale? What is extremely important? What are you trying to really figure out here? And that's going to dictate like even the subgenres of assessment itself, not even just the assessment tool. Are you, is it quantitative? Are you trying to, collect numerical data? How many people are doing this? How many people apply to that? Or is it a little more qualitative? What phenomena are you trying to measure? Why do people do this? Where this is particularly important in our therapeutic world, have to be really mindful of where assessments take place, and you have to think a lot about where that environment, or what that environment might do to the particular individual or the groups of people taking these assessments. Um, for instance, if you're working with a client with PTSD and you're administering a related assessment, and in my place it's outdoors, and if there's a lot of cars driving by very very quickly, that could be really triggering. That might be something that should be something you take into consideration. When is really important as well. Of course, depending on what you're trying to measure, it's if you're recalling something, it might be very difficult, or just not really reliable, really. If you're recalling something from a long time ago, and maybe you can still do the tests and the assessments, but you do need to check for that and to control for that. And the why, the purpose, what's the point of this? And again, bringing in our clinical practice, our future clinical practice, our current. This is enormous. What's the goal? Why do this assessment? Is it for you as the clinician just to check that box because you feel like you should? Are you going to get answers that you can't get otherwise, or in any other way? This is extremely important. Making sure that why you're choosing a particular assessment and why you're choosing to do the assessment in general in that fashion. Is it for client gain? Is it to move forward with understanding of the client and for the treatment process in general? Benefits, limitations of assessments, that should be discussed, at least in the style of therapy that I'm really connecting to and adapting to, collaborative therapy. That should really be discussed pretty transparently. I think that's regardless of type of therapy. That's your ethical duty as a clinician to discuss these benefits and limitations, just like we do in informed consent, the risks and benefits of therapy. Conducting these assessments, again, regardless of your clinical style, or modality that you subscribe to the most, you should be discussing this pretty clearly with your clients. But particularly in the collaborative world, transparency is huge, and that's something that I really try to incorporate into my sessions and whenever I do any assessment, if you will. So let's see. So there's a couple of optional points to add on here. Um, I'm going to go ahead and pick the standardized versus non-standardized assessment because this is particularly relevant for me. I am at an equine assisted therapy program and animal assisted therapy, and we don't really do a ton of standardized assessments, and standardized assessments being a little more a little more rigid, a little more consistent. They follow very, very specific guidelines and processes, where, you can get a lot more clear data with standardized assessments. With non-standardized assessments, um, it's a lot more subjective, and they can lack uniformity, I think. And I do so much more of this. It's so much more flexible. It's maybe a little more discreet. It's a little more ongoing. It's not sit down with a pen and paper and fill out these questions or circle whatever is relevant. It's it's a lot more behavioral. It's an action. It's experiential, and the byproduct of that is the circumstance of that rather is that it's very much subjective. So it relies on clinical judgment, which would be pretty intimidating if I didn't have so much supervision around me. But why do so few therapists use formal and systemic assessments in practice? This is another one I want to throw in here. Um, I I'm actually really relieved to come across this. I mentioned this in class actually, because I have found, at least at the level of therapy that I'm at, that it's very uncomfortable to imagine giving a rigid standardized assessment. Um, but I do imagine a world with clients that I maybe don't have now that I would need to do that. However, having this bit of information um, come across this class, I've understood that there are so many ways to gather the same information that you would in an assessment in a collaborative, more kind of dialogical manner. And over time, Professor was mentioning that you really become familiar with the criteria. You become familiar with the assessments, and you don't necessarily need to sit down and ask these rigid questions, or this one and then two and then three and so on and so forth, however many questions there are. You can kind of just throw them into your conversation and get the exact same answers and have a little more of a free flowing conversation. And um, I think that really helps build the rapport and build that therapeutic relationship, help you drawn to the client, which is, of course, one of the most important and impactful things in a therapeutic session. All right, I'm going to go ahead and cut it there. It's already at almost 8 minutes. I hope you enjoyed. Cheers.